Stark's expression became steely, and he turned to the stunned crew. "Everyone, you're dismissed for the day. Leave everything where it is and we'll pick it up tomorrow." The studio quickly cleared, and Nancy made sure she was the last to go, taking her time and looking as pathetic as possible. As she expected, she suddenly heard the sound of Amelia's heels storming in her direction. "Where do you think you're going, hussy?" Nancy smiled before spinning around. This was her moment. Amelia charged up to her, eyes glowing venomously. "Seems like the lesson I handed you last time didn't stick, huh? Here you are again, attempting to steal what's mine. You have no idea what I'm capable of, you little brat." Nancy feigned innocence, her youthful face the perfect mask. "I didn't know. Stark told me he had already dumped you, and you had decided to retire. I would have never taken the job if I knew you still wanted it." Amelia's eyes seemed ready to explode from their sockets. "What did you say to me?" "I'm innocent. You were young once, weren't you? I was offered a job by a sweet, professional man who said he would look after me. I would have been foolish not to take it." Nancy struggled to conceal her glee as she drove the stake further into Amelia's heart. "How could I have known you hadn't moved on like he had? After all, he drove me around in a new car and gave me flowers and cake. When he offered me the contract, he told me that a glamorous new car needed a glamorous new face. I assumed you knew." The tension in Amelia's face turned it an unhealthy shade of purple, and Nancy could tell it was only going to take one more twist of the knife. Summoning her doe-eyed expression, she leaned into Amelia and added sweetly, "Please don't be mad at me. I've always thought of you as a role model, like a nice aunt. If you can't be the face of the company anymore, would you at least like to be my assistant?" Amelia's body suddenly began to tremble, and in a flash, she whipped her hand back and swung it ferociously at Nancy's face. Just as she was about to make contact, an arm shot in and snatched Amelia's wrist out of the air. Before Nancy could react, Stark threw Amelia's arm and it hurled her backwards. Caught off balance in her towering heels, she plummeted onto the cold marble floor in a heap. Stark moved swiftly to Nancy's side and enveloped her in his protective embrace. His voice was a soothing whisper. "Maria, everything is all right. I promise I'll never let Amelia hurt you again." Nancy's eyes sparkled with crocodile tears, threatening to spill over. "I'm okay. I'm sure she didn't mean all those horrible things she said." As planned, Nancy's relentless act ignited Amelia anew. She staggered back to her feet and roared at her. "Stop this pathetic charade, you little—" But Stark cut her off. "Amelia!" His commanding shout echoed through the space. "Enough of your tantrum! Go home! Now!" Amelia spat on the floor, sneering. "So, you're tired of me and plan to put a ring on her instead, is that it? You're just going to let her lure you in with this transparent victim act? I thought you were smarter than that, Stark, but I guess you're just as pathetic as her." "Enough!" Stark thundered, and a chill briefly settled over the cavernous studio. When he continued, his voice was calm but firm, like a steel blade ready to strike. "Maria is the face of the Franklin Group now, and if you know what's good for you, you will show her the respect she deserves." "She bought that spot with her sheets, didn't she?" "Don't push me over the edge, Amelia." "Or what? You'd hurt me? For her?" Amelia's face was a mask of distorted fury now. Nancy stood safely behind Stark, but caught Amelia's gaze with a victorious grin. As Amelia's jaw dropped, Nancy mouthed 2 words. "I win." "Just look at her, Stark. Look at the conniving little wretch you've chosen over me." Stark glanced back at Nancy, but she had already dropped the smile. Bathed in the studio lights, her face glittered with tears, and she looked as fragile as a porcelain doll. Her body trembled, and she whimpered with desperation. "Amelia, this is your last chance. Leave now, or suffer the consequences." With a feral shriek, Amelia charged at Stark and raised her hand to strike him. He caught her wrist again, but this time he held it tight, bearing down on her with a penetrating gaze. She struggled to break free, but Stark's grip held her fast, like a vice. Finally, her resolve crumbled, and the dam of her tears burst open. "Stark, you're a soulless beast. I gave you everything, and after all these godforsaken years, you would toss me aside like scraps?" Still clutching Amelia's wrist, Stark's face twisted into a scowl that Nancy had only seen once before, the day he'd murdered her. Before he could speak, Nancy cut in. "Please don't break up because of me. Amelia clearly loves you, Stark. I'm sure you can fix things, and I can't stand to come between such a perfect couple. I'll resign as spokesperson. Don't worry, you'll never see me again. I'm so sorry I ruined everything." Wiping her tear-streaked face, Nancy turned and ran out of the room in hysterics. An eerie silence settled over the studio as Nancy made her retreat. Without another word, Stark took Amelia by the hand and dragged her to his car. As he navigated back to his hotel, his mind churned relentlessly. Amelia's possessive nature had always been problematic, but she was quickly becoming an existential risk. Stark was a cautious man above all else, and it increasingly seemed that getting rid of her was the only way to guarantee his long-term safety. There was just one wild card: whatever evidence she possessed of their shared crimes, and her willingness to unleash it if she ever truly felt threatened. It soon became clear that he wasn't the only one thinking along those lines. When they crossed the threshold of his hotel room, Amelia immediately turned on him. She kicked off her shoes and clutched a table lamp, prepared to fight for her life. Arching an eyebrow, Stark chose not to engage. "What is this? An episode of Jerry Springer? We have bigger things to deal with, Amelia. Jacob disappeared last night." Amelia froze in her tracks, the lamp suspended in midair, as if time itself had screeched to a halt. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "While I was at the summit, someone plucked Jacob right from under our noses. It was highly planned, and we found no evidence of who it was." Stark's voice was laced with an icy chill. "I've secured a flight tonight. You can get your own flight back." As Stark began to pack, Amelia became frantic. She grabbed onto Stark's arm, desperation soaking her voice. "Wait a minute. You're telling me that that little shit's not just missing, but someone rescued him? How did you let that happen?" "I told you. It was an extremely professional job. They'd clearly been planning for weeks. We threw everything we had at it, but they were prepared. 6 of my men are being buried as we speak." Stark's movements were devoid of empathy or emotion, his mind laser-focused on his task. "Whether you decide to return or not, I couldn't care less. Just stay the hell out of my way." Amelia blinked, her mind grappling with the news. "If Jacob's off the grid, what's our game plan?" "Well, if we fail to track him down, then the entirety of the Franklin Group will become his on his 18th birthday, and we don't get a penny. If he dies before his 18th birthday, the company automatically reverts to a charitable trust, and we don't get a penny. If he merely decides he doesn't want to sign his shares over to his loving older brother, we don't get a penny. See a pattern there?" Amelia stammered, momentarily at a loss for words. After a few moments, she turned to Stark with a fresh scowl. "If you hadn't gallivanted off to New York with your little trollop, Jacob wouldn't have gotten away." Stark spun around, and his icy eyes bore into her. "I'm here for work. You know, that thing that pays for your lavish lifestyle." "Work, you say? Is that what you call chasing after 20-year-old ass? I bet she masterminded this whole thing. Men like you are so easily manipulated. I would know, after all. All Maria had to do was stick her chest out and shed a few tears, and she got you to throw away everything we've built." Stark scoffed, ignoring her. As he zipped up his suitcase, he retrieved his phone and dialed his assistant. "Bring the car around. I'm leaving for the airport, and cancel all of Amelia's cards." Suddenly, Amelia wrenched the phone out of his hand and threw it to the floor. "You ruined everything, and I'm not even allowed to voice my opinion?" Stark's eyes narrowed, and a harsh sneer split his face. He slowly paced toward Amelia, backing her into a corner. "Amelia, do you actually harbor the illusion that I won't end you right here and now? You're worthless to me. You're like a toy I kept around because I enjoyed playing with it. But now I'm bored. And do you know what happens to old toys that no one wants to play with anymore? They get thrown to the dogs." Stark loomed over her as she pressed her body into the corner, his superiority crystal clear. Her fear was evident, but she finally choked out a few words. "I have the evidence. If you kill me, it will automatically be sent to every law enforcement agency and newspaper." Stark narrowed his eyes. It was just as he'd suspected. He would never have killed her in a New York City hotel, swarming with watchful eyes. But now, he knew she had a secret stash of evidence. That meant he could set about finding it, and when he did, he could be free of her, once and for all. Stark leaned back and fixed his gaze on her, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. "If it's mutual assured destruction you want, then fine. But going forward, whatever woman I choose to pursue is none of your concern. And if you still covet the spotlight, remember your place. You haven't even begun to see how difficult I can make things for you." With that, he exited the room and put Amelia out of his mind. If he knew one thing about her, it was that she was a stone-cold survivor. She would never destroy herself, just to take him down with her. As Amelia watched Stark storm out, a determined resolve washed over her. All the suffering inflicted upon her was Maria's doing, and all Amelia had to do to get Stark back was to make him forget Maria existed. Instead of going back to Houston, she decided to stay in New York and wait for her opportunity to turn the tables. After all, if the world were to see innocent little Maria in the arms of another man, then the Stark she knew would lose interest overnight. With the seeds of a plan germinating in her mind, Amelia slowly rose from the floor, and a wicked grin crept across her face. Stark landed in Houston in the late afternoon, and by the time he got home, the chaos that once prevailed had been swept away. But as he walked through the yard, he noticed a small hole in the ground. His curiosity piqued. He found the maid and asked what she knew about it. The maid responded nervously. "I saw Jacob dig something up as he was being rescued, but it was too dark to see what it was." Stark's interest was stirred. "And you're certain it was Jacob? If it was too dark to see the object, could you really see his face?" The maid lowered her gaze. I guess not. But the silhouette looked like Jacob. There was just so much fighting and—" Stark cut her off with a wave of his hand. He scrutinized the scene. A lush sea of viridian grass, undisturbed except for the lone crater. It was clear that whoever did it had known precisely where and what they were looking for. His mind raced. Could it really have been Jacob? What secrets from his past could he possibly have been stashing away in the yard without anyone noticing? Besides, when Stark staged his takeover, Jacob was only 11, and he did everything possible to keep him in the dark. The idea of Jacob possessing any meaningful secrets seemed implausible. But if it wasn't Jacob, then who? He watched Nancy and her father die, not to mention her mother. There was the remote possibility that Esther could have survived her suicidal plunge into the sea. But even if she had, she'd been smart enough to stay completely off Stark's radar since. Could there possibly be a third person besides him and Amelia that knew what he'd done? Stark's brow creased, his mind a whirlpool of doubts and questions. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Jonathan and Kim landed in Seattle. Inside the plane, a team of doctors battled fiercely against time, attempting to rein in Kim's precarious heart rate. Upon disembarking, they shepherded Kim into a waiting ambulance and sped off toward the research institute. As Jonathan descended from the plane and stepped toward his waiting car, a gaggle of reporters began shouting questions at him. He knew this particular flight was bound to cause a stir, and not for the same reasons the paparazzi usually hounded him. Given the urgency of Kim's condition, Jonathan had decided to unveil the Davis Group's newest innovation, a line of hypersonic subspace aircraft that could fly from New York to Seattle in under an hour. Steve was overseeing construction of the plant in Mexico, where they would soon be mass-produced, and Jonathan's surprise unveiling had certainly rattled some cages. Nonetheless, given the solemnity of the moment, he declined to take questions and rushed to catch up with Kim's ambulance. Back in New York, Nancy was just about to sleep when she noticed the trending story about Jonathan's flight. Despite the huge news about the plane, commenters immediately began speculating about his relationship with Kim. It must be true love if he pulled out a whole new plane for her. If she doesn't marry him, I will. It's the most romantic thing I've ever seen. Nancy furrowed her brows in consternation. She believed Jonathan that his ties with Kim were purely familial, but seeing him connected to another woman still stirred up a squall of emotions. Just as she was about to forward the story to Esther, her phone buzzed with a call from an international number. After a fleeting moment of hesitation, she picked up. Hello? Who is this? A momentary silence ensued before a voice she recognized came through the phone. Nancy's heart skipped a beat. It was Steve. She stammered before finally saying, You're still in Mexico, aren't you? Yes, but we finally got the cell tower set up so we can have basic communications. Data speeds are still slow, so I haven't been able to get online. How are you doing? Are you handling the heat okay? I've been watching the weather down there, and it seems pretty rough. I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking. We've nearly got permanent lodging and a hardwired comm center finished, so things will be more comfortable soon. Maybe you'd like to come down and see it? Nancy shouted out a laugh. Let me know when you install the pool, and then we'll chat. How did I not think of a pool? I could have dug the pit myself by now. You really are a genius. Nancy paused. Conversations with Steve had never flowed so freely before. She found herself genuinely enjoying his company, and it left her flustered. I'm glad you're doing well. When do you think the project will be finished? Steve's breath hitched. It could go on for months, but I'm planning on visiting for Jonathan's birthday, so I hope I'll see you then. Nancy's heart fluttered at Steve's words. Ever since the ice between them thawed, Steve's attitude toward her had taken a noticeable shift. He had stood by her side during her public disgrace at the mall, gone out of his way to say goodbye to her before he left, and now he was looking forward to seeing her? A daring thought sprang up in Nancy's mind, setting her pulse racing. Did Steve catch feelings for her? This revelation left her stunned, but she could not find another plausible explanation. In her mind, Steve was hardly the kind to initiate chats with women, let alone indulge in this kind of banter. She was on the verge of broaching the subject when Steve cut in. Oh, there's a friend here who would like to say hi to you. What? Who? Suddenly, she heard a synthetic voice chime in from the other end. My brilliant creator! It's been so long, my sensors hardly remember the 3D map of your face. That's not true. I never forget things, but it seemed like a nice icebreaker. Nancy's eyes went wide. You brought Frida along? Steve laughed. I was worried I wouldn't have anyone else to talk to. An unexpected warmth had enveloped their conversation, and Nancy decided to dig deeper. I find that hard to believe. Have you come across any interesting ladies down there? Any romantic prospects? Steve's tone was suddenly stilted again. There are a few women among my business associates, but our relationships are strictly professional. An icy silence descended upon their conversation, both seemingly at a loss for words. Eventually, Steve broke the silence. I guess I should return to work. All right. Take care, Steve. Nancy hung up and laid back on her bed, her mind reeling from the conversation. He said he expected to be back for Jonathan's birthday, which was the exact day that Nancy and Jonathan planned to announce their relationship. If Steve really had developed feelings for her, she hated to imagine what might happen between him and Jonathan. The next day, Nancy woke up with a beaming smile. She and Esther were flying to Boston to see Jacob in his new home. She had initially planned for him to stay with her in New York, but given her new association with Stark, she reasoned it was too dangerous. As she daydreamed about spending a stress-free day with Jacob for the first time in 4 years, she was suddenly pulled out of her reverie by a phone call. It was Jonathan. She smiled wide. "Hey, handsome." But instead of Jonathan's familiar baritone, she heard a faint, frail voice. "Sorry, Maria. It's Kim. I didn't have your number, so I asked to borrow Jonathan's phone." Nancy was struck by how fragile she sounded, like a brittle leaf in the wind. She subconsciously tightened her grip on the phone. "Hi, Kim. How are you feeling?" The less said, the better. A whirlpool of emotions threatened to engulf her. Was this Kim's way of asserting dominance, or guilt-tripping her? Inhaling a deep breath, she kept her voice steady. "I'm sorry to hear that. But if you don't mind me asking, why did you call?" "Honestly, I'm not sure I'll pull through this time, Maria. And Jonathan told me about all the mix-ups about our relationship, so I wanted to set things straight. He said it wasn't necessary, but I hate the idea of looming over your relationship like some kind of ghost." Kim's words hitched as she gasped for breath. After a pause to regain her composure, she continued. "Jonathan's a big brother to me. Always has been. I know it's hard to believe, but I wanted you to hear directly from me that I support you two, and I have no desire to come between you." Nancy found herself taken aback. Could it be that Kim was genuinely attempting to make peace? Had she misjudged her intentions all along? "Kim, rest assured, there's no confusion." "That's a relief. You know, I can't help but envy you. Your vitality, your ability to chase your dreams. Jonathan mentioned you're pioneering driveless cars with your closest friends. I envy that too. I have a soft spot for travel, but alas, I'm stuck in a broken body." Kim was interrupted by a hacking cough, but kept going. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm unloading all of this on you. Jonathan just mentioned his plan to marry you once he turns 32, and I realized I probably won't live to see the day. All of this just came bubbling up." Her voice wavered, heavy with sorrow and yearning. "My point is, you and Jonathan deserve all the happiness in the world. I hope you find it together." Tears pricked at the corner of Nancy's eyes. A wave of sympathy washed over her for Kim's untold sorrows. Collecting herself, she finally replied, "Thank you, Kim. That means a lot to me. I think Jonathan is back from the bathroom. I should go." "Take care of yourself, Kim. I sincerely hope to see you again." "I'll do my best." After the call ended, Nancy slumped to the floor as a wave of emotion crashed over her. Relief, catharsis, guilt, and pity. In all honesty, she had been nursing a grudge against Kim for months. Despite the security Jonathan offered, Nancy couldn't shake off her insecurities after hearing how Kim truly felt about him. But her heartfelt words and her sincere blessing had dissolved Nancy's resentment. Instead, she was consumed by a deep melancholy and profoundly hoped that Kim would one day get to explore the world she so wished to see. With her luggage finally packed, Nancy headed to the airport to meet Esther. Having learned her lesson from the past, she shot Jonathan a message as she waited in the security line. "Esther and I are off to Boston. I'll be back in a couple days." Jonathan's response came quickly. "Safe travels, Maria. Reach out when you touch down. I've already made arrangements for your transportation." Throughout the plane ride, a strange blend of anticipation and ease wrapped around Nancy. When they finally arrived and checked into Jacob's hotel, she was so anxious she was ready to burst. Her heart pounded like a drum as she approached the door to his room. She pressed the doorbell, and muffled footsteps echoed from the depths of the room, pausing as if to size up the visitors through layers of wood and paint. Finally, the door creaked open. Jacob's eyes first landed on Nancy, lightening up like the North Star. Then, his gaze drifted to Esther. His shock was palpable, freezing him in place. Struck dumb with astonishment, all he managed was to wave them inside. Nancy followed Esther into the room, and the door closed behind them with a soft thud. Before they could even settle down, Esther swarmed Jacob with a hug, scrutinizing him from head to toe. "My God, Jake, you've grown into a tower! Just 2 years, and you're taller than me now." Jacob responded with a smile that made Nancy's heart glow. Esther had always been like a second sister to Jacob, and their enduring connection brought Nancy indescribable joy. Esther finally released him and gestured toward Nancy. "Do you know who this is?" Jacob narrowed his eyes, like he knew it in his heart, but he couldn't believe it was true. "It's me, Jacob. It's Nancy. It's true that Stark killed me, but it wasn't 3 years ago. It was 6 months ago. I have no idea how it happened, but my spirit was set adrift and ultimately landed in this body." Jacob's mouth opened and closed like he wanted to speak, but not a whisper escaped. Tears etched lines down his face, and he grabbed Nancy's hand, shaking with raw emotion. Nancy pulled him in and hugged him tightly. "I'm so sorry I couldn't come for you sooner. You've been shouldering so much all these years." Jacob shook his head, a flood of words caged within him. Fumbling for his phone, he rapidly typed out a message. "Sister, all I care about is that you're alive. Esther too. Now it's my turn to protect you." Tears cascaded down Nancy's cheeks, and they clung to each other like that for the next hour, swapping stories and unburdening their heavy hearts. As Nancy replayed a story about their mom, letting them eat ice cream for dinner, Jacob abruptly remembered something and dashed for his phone. His fingers typed hurriedly. "Nancy, there's something you don't know about Mom. She didn't commit suicide. Stark coerced her into jumping off the building. Just before she died, she told me that she'd stash video proof of what Stark had done in a safety deposit box at the bank." Nancy stared at the phone screen, dumbfounded. From beyond the grave, their mother was still looking out for them. A tremor of shock swept through Nancy as she read Jacob's revelation. Her voice trembled with anticipation. "Wait, do you mean there's a video of him? Abducting me? Holding me prisoner?" Jacob hurriedly replied, "I'm not sure of the details, but I remember the day of her death perfectly. She came home in a breathless panic, and she told me about a video hidden in the bank's safe. She said to never mention it to anyone, not even the people I trusted. She was just about to tell me the password when Stark sauntered in. When she saw him, she turned to me with a serene, heartfelt smile. She patted my head and said, 'Jacob, my darling boy, promise me you'll take care of yourself. Stay curious and strong, and live a beautiful life.' I was so bewildered, I couldn't comprehend what she was saying. But before I could ask, she gave me one last smile, pushed me to the side, and leapt off the balcony. That was the moment my voice abandoned me and never came back. And for months after, I saw Stark as a fellow sufferer, even considered him my protector. It wasn't until a year later when I stumbled upon his plot against Esther that I understood the depth of his deceit, and I connected it with what Mom said about the video." Nancy's heart wrenched as she imagined the immense burden Jacob had been forced to carry. He was a mere child of 12 and had to live in secret under the all-seeing eye of a fiend who annihilated his family. Nancy sobbed, "Jacob, I'm so sorry. We failed you. We didn't protect you. You experienced such horrors at such a tender age. If only I had recognized the monster Stark was, none of this would have happened. Jacob resumed typing. It's okay, sister. I always held on to the belief that I would see you again. Even the first time we met at the exhibition, I knew there was something familiar about you. After another long hug, Nancy mounted a look of determination. So, all we need to bust Stark is Mom's safe password. I have a gut feeling about what it is, but bank security is stringent. 3 wrong guesses locked the account, and only Mom could lift the freeze. Her mind swirled with emotions. They only had 3 precious chances, but if they could retrieve that video, they could expose Stark's heinous acts. She yearned for the world to witness his evil, and for everyone who had survived his treachery to finally reclaim their stolen peace. Later that afternoon, Nancy set out for the local branch of the Lilly Foundation, carrying the black card she dug out from the yard, and the optical membrane Eduardo made for her. The Lilly Foundation was the charitable organization that Nancy started with her mother's gift. It had since expanded all across the country from its original base in Houston, and because Nancy had set up the foundation anonymously, Stark was never able to connect it with her. That meant the entirety of her mother's fortune was still in the foundation's accounts, and all she needed to access it was the original Nancy's biometrics and keycard, which she now had, thanks to the black card and the membrane. She marched into the foundation's ultra-modern office and made a beeline for the customer service terminal. She swiped her card, then used the optical device to verify her identity. With unfettered access to the foundation's system, she picked through a trove of financial data and then scanned a massive list of contacts. She finally selected one and wrote down their number with a devious smile. An hour later, Nancy exited the building, her bag slightly heavier with the weight of 2 new credit cards and an asset guarantee document in Maria's name. Jacob and Esther were waiting for her in a car out front, and together they headed to the new boarding school that Jacob had picked for himself. Nancy initially worried about the idea of Jacob living on his own, but upon meeting his new teachers, her anxieties dissipated like mist in the morning sun. It turned out that the school had multiple mute students, and his peers engaged with him enthusiastically, with no signs of bullying. After finalizing Jacob's admission procedures, Nancy took the 3 of them out to celebrate. When the night was finally winding down, she sat Jacob down for a final sisterly chat. I know this is all pretty exciting, but you have to promise to keep your guard up for as long as Stark is around. I'll always watch your back, but be careful with anything you post on the internet. Nancy's warning was laced with a mother's protective concern, causing Jacob to smile softly as she continued. And don't pinch pennies, okay? Esther and I have plenty of money, and I got you that credit card for a reason. I want you to have anything you need to be happy and healthy. Esther chuckled at Nancy's flurry of concern. You're turning into such a mom. Nancy shot back with a playful grin. Ever seen a mom this young and beautiful? Look at you all high and mighty. Jacob, can you believe this? She's 21 and acting like she owns the world. Did you forget we used to be the same age? I'm actually 20, but don't worry about it. I know your mind is getting weak with old age. Esther stuck her tongue out, and Nancy jabbed her with an elbow. Jacob tried to break it up, but they swarmed him instead, collapsing into a pile of laughs and shouts. Across the country in Seattle, the mood was far more somber. Kim was undergoing an extensive surgical procedure, and Jonathan was waiting outside with her father. After nearly 20 hours with no updates, James flopped down in a seat next to Jonathan, his open panic standing in stark contrast to Jonathan's stoicism. James looked at him with trepidation. Jonathan, do you think Kim will? But Jonathan interrupted. You have to keep faith, Mr. Reynolds. They accepted the challenge because they believe they can conquer it. His reassurance hung in the silence, both men keenly aware of the dangerous gamble that accompanied any surgery. Suddenly, the door of the operating room theater swung open, and a wary surgeon made an announcement. The patient has lost a substantial amount of blood, and we've exhausted our reserves. We called for backup, but I'm afraid there isn't enough time. Which one of you is family? Or either of you type A?" Before James could stutter a response, Jonathan stood. "Let me. You're worn out and you've been running on fumes all day. Kim will need you to be strong when she wakes up." The doctor offered a nod of approval. "Very well. Follow me." The surgeon explained that Kim's condition had deteriorated rapidly, and they would need roughly 400 milliliters of blood. Unfortunately, another unexpected complication arose, and in a rush against the clock, Jonathan ended up donating 600 milliliters in total. Drained by the blood loss and the days of vigilance, Jonathan found himself swimming in a haze of fatigue before finally succumbing to sleep. Upon waking up, Jonathan found himself in a restful lounge. The weariness still clung to him, but his condition had improved. As he pushed himself to his feet, he intercepted James's urgent conversation with the doctor. "Tell me straight, does she stand a chance of waking up?" The surgeon's voice was heavy with resignation. "All I can say for sure is that the surgery was a success, but her vitals were already so poor, it's possible that her heart and brain will never fully recover, perhaps not even enough to rise from her coma. At this point, it all comes down to your daughter's will to live. It may sound silly, but I advise you to think of the thing she cares about most and talk to her about it. It's possible that it could stimulate brain function." Kim was finally ushered out of the operating theater, her eyes sealed shut and her face eerily pale. Jonathan and James followed her to the intensive care unit, and after the doctors dispensed more instructions, they left them to their solitude. In the unnerving silence of the ward, James turned to Jonathan. "I need to have a private word with Kim, if you don't mind." "Of course, Mr. Reynolds. Take your time. I'll be right outside." Once Jonathan was out of earshot, James sank into the chair next to Kim's bed, his voice a melancholic murmur. "Kim, your mother has already left me. If you depart too, how will I ever face the emptiness?" His voice faltered. "I've spent years telling myself to be ready for this moment, but standing here, powerless to help you, I realize just how impossible it is." James took a deep breath and glanced up at the door where Jonathan stood watch. "If you're in there, I want to tell you some wonderful news. Just a moment ago, Jonathan promised to marry you when you wake up. I know you're probably wondering how I knew you had feelings for him, but a father can always see what's in his daughter's heart. So please, come back to me. Come back to Jonathan, and let us shower you with all the love you deserve." Kim's eyes remained motionless, but a flicker of movement caught James's eye. It was so slight, he thought he might have hallucinated it, but then it happened again. Her fingers twitched. In the unwavering march of time, Kim felt utterly static. She was finally out of pain, but she was also out of her body, adrift in an endless void. Ever so slowly, a vision formed in her mind. First, there was a sea of flowers, all in radiant bloom. As she made her way through them, they parted to reveal a face she knew instantly. Jonathan. He was dressed in a tuxedo, and he stood at the end of a red carpet under an ornate wooden arch. As he extended his hand to her, she looked down and realized she was in a beautiful wedding gown, its lengthy train sweeping the ground like a pure white tide. She yearned to bridge the distance to him, but the harder she tried to reach his outstretched hand, the heavier her body felt. Every step suddenly felt like a Herculean effort. Suddenly, a bell tolled in her ears, its echo rippling through the vibrant dreamscape. The verdant sea of flowers and the regal red carpet began to disintegrate, fading like ice kissed by the scorching sun. With Jonathan's figure wavering on the edge of oblivion, Kim felt driven by a force she didn't know she possessed. She rose to her feet one last time and lunged forward. There was a flash of white, but this time, when she looked down, the gown she saw was a hospital's. She slowly turned her head, and her eyes adjusted. Recognition flooded her senses. Jonathan and James were seated at her bedside. James immediately burst into tears. "Kim, speak to me. Can you see me? Can you hear my voice?" Jonathan was hot on his heels. "I'll get the doctor right away." The cogwheel of Kim's mind creaked and groaned, slowly churning as she processed their words. A realization hit her like a truck. The wedding was nothing but an illusion. Jonathan was her friend, and that's all he would ever be. A bittersweet ache welled up in her heart as she whispered to them in reassurance. "I can hear you. I'm okay." In reality, discomfort gnawed at her. Her heart ached constantly, and each breath was a struggle. But this was a torment she had grown accustomed to. As the doctor conducted a quick examination, he reminded Kim of her dietary restrictions. James shot up from his chair. "Don't worry about a thing. Jonathan will keep you company, and I'll find you the perfect dinner." James's brisk departure left Kim alone with Jonathan. Gathering her strength, she met his gaze. "Jonathan, I have a request." He responded with soothing tenderness. "Whatever you need, just say the word. If it's within my reach, it's yours." "You once said that you'd only get married if you made it to 32. She could barely choke out the words. She took a stuttering breath before forcing the rest out. "Could you bring your wedding with Maria forward? I'm scared I might not make it, and nothing would make me happier than seeing you on your wedding day." She knew she wouldn't stand beside him as his bride, but her heart yearned to catch even a glimpse of the dreamlike scene she'd painted in her mind. Jonathan stood, dumbstruck, unprepared for her request. Undeterred, Kim implored him with desperate eyes. "Please, Jonathan. I know I'll never get married, but you." His voice, when it came, was a hushed whisper. "All right, Kim. I'll speak to Maria." "Thank you for everything." With that, a gentle sleep enveloped her. Jonathan's mind reeled as he tucked her in, and he found his gaze drawn to the ticking clock. It was nightfall at home. Maria was probably back in New York, warm in their bed. The thought of an early wedding set off a whirlwind of emotions within him. Anxiety, anticipation, joy, excitement. Could it be that deep down, he too yearned to get married as soon as possible? With a deep, grounding breath, Jonathan picked up his phone and dialed Jack. "I need you to find information on wedding rings and dresses. Find me a handful of designers and venues to choose from, and send them to me by the end of the day." "Yes, sir." "And Jack, don't let Maria find out about this." Almost immediately after arriving in New York, Esther found herself on another flight, this time to Seattle. Brock had set up meetings for them with some of the richest investors in the country, and as soon as she boarded the plane, he provided her with a heap of materials to review. Exhausted from the trip to Boston, Esther planned to get some sleep before diving into the work. But just as she sank into the plush comfort of her seat, an all-too-familiar silhouette materialized beside her. He was a tower of a man, and the cut of his suit pants accentuated his height. Esther craned her neck up to meet his eyes and smile wryly. What are the chances? Xavier stared back at her in shock before offering a curt nod and sitting down next to her. Just then, Austin's voice cut through the quiet cabin from one row back. "My darling Esther, now that you and Brock are broken up, that means I can pursue you again, right? Don't forget, you were my first love." Esther rolled her eyes. "Shove off, Austin." She glanced at Xavier to gauge his reaction, but he was absorbed in a document, unmoved by their exchange. Brock spoke up from one row in front. "Chill, Austin. We're here for business, not drama. Quit riling up the talent." "But we've got 6 hours. What could be more productive than wooing my future wife?" Austin swiveled his head back to Esther. "What do you say? I bet the pilot could marry us right now." Esther pulled a sleep mask over her eyes her tone openly irritated. I'm going to sleep, Austin. Don't condemn me to a life of loneliness. Have a heart. With her patience worn thin, Esther ripped her eye mask off and turned to face Austin. Don't want to live a life of loneliness? Here's a suggestion. Yes, babe. Stop being an obnoxious tool with nothing to offer. She smirked and sat back down, her eyes darting toward Xavier, just as Austin tapped him on the shoulder. Buddy, it's a real pain twisting my neck like this. My girl's sitting next to you and we're having a bit of a tiff. Mind swapping seats? Finally, Xavier's gaze lifted to meet Austin's. It was a tranquil look, neither frosty nor heated, but the calm was so profound it was unnerving. Without uttering a word, Xavier's gaze flitted from Austin to the document before him and back. Austin's cheeks suddenly bloomed a rosy red, and he looked away, sinking back into his own seat. As the last passengers filed in and the crew locked the doors behind them, Esther pivoted her head to Xavier, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. Xavier remained engrossed in his documents, not once raising his gaze. No need. I just can't stand the incessant chatter. Esther narrowed her eyes at his dismissive response, but decided not to snap back. With a loud huff, she put on her eye mask and tried to sleep. In all the excitement of reuniting with Jacob, the three of them had hardly made any time to rest. Within minutes, she was fast asleep. About an hour into the trip, the flight attendants came through to serve beverages. Xavier asked for a cup of coffee, and as the warm mug was handed to him, his gaze fell upon Esther. Her blanket crumbled into a heap on the floor. His arm froze, holding the coffee cup in midair, as he considered whether to fix her blanket. Suddenly, the flight attendant's eyes widened with recognition. Esther! Xavier looked up at him in surprise, but he quickly ran off, chattering to one of the other flight attendants. He reappeared with a fresh blanket in his hands moments later, and with the utmost care, he picked up the discarded blanket and replaced it with the new one. Xavier observed his tender act with furrowed brows, struggling to understand what had just happened. But before he could ask the flight attendant how he knew her, he had run off once again. 2 more hours slipped by, and Xavier had just wrapped up an email to Jonathan when he sensed a movement beside him. Esther's body began sliding toward him, and just like that, a gentle weight rested on his shoulder. Still asleep, Esther let out a soft, contented sigh, her breath dancing against the skin of his neck. Xavier looked at the mask concealing her eyes and teetered on the edge of a decision. Should he move her or let her be? As he deliberated, a captivating fragrance suddenly swept over him. It was an intoxicating cocktail of citrus and flowers, laced with the crisp freshness of a dew-kissed forest. He had never smelled anything so enchanting, and knowing she had designed it herself, felt a newfound respect for her. Once again, his musings were interrupted by the sight of the flight attendant striding towards him. He was a striking figure, tall, handsome, and seemingly in his early 20s. He paused before he stooped in front of Xavier, his low voice brimming with an assertive undertone. And who might you be to Esther? Esther nestled against him, and Xavier leveled a frosty gaze at the flight attendant. His stare was a silent challenge. My relationship to her? How does it concern you? The flight attendant stewed before finally blurting out. Because she used to be my girlfriend. From the row ahead, Brock chimed in. Join the club, dude. Then Austin spoke up. I'm trying, but you won't let me. Taken aback by the sudden emergence of the other contenders, the flight attendant stood back and smirked. Well, she clearly likes me better than the rest of you clowns, because she's wearing the earrings I gave her on our 3rd date. Austin shot out of his chair. Oh, you bought them? How cute. I made that bracelet she's wearing, and the only person with the same design is Michelle Obama. Austin's eyes suddenly landed on Esther sleeping peacefully on Xavier's shoulder, and a wave of indignation washed over him. So when I asked you to switch seats, you refused, and now you're trying to swoop in? Esther found herself yanked out of her dream by the sounds of shouting. As she peeled off her mask and rubbed her eyes, an eerie silence fell over them. Blinking away the sleep, Esther noticed her head resting on Xavier's shoulder. With a jolt, she straightened up, stuttering out an apology. I didn't realize. I'm sorry. Xavier maintained his aloof, icy demeanor. I would have moved you if it was a problem. Her eyes then met the flight attendant's, and she had a flash of recognition, but she swiftly regained composure. Is something wrong, sir? The flight attendant looked crestfallen that Esther didn't recognize him. You don't remember me? I'm Daniel. I bought you those earrings. I was in love with you. Esther gave a placating smile. I'm so sorry, but I really don't remember you. I'm not averse to a reintroduction, though. Crushed, the flight attendant walked off, while Austin stuck his tongue out at him. Having chased off a rival, he swiveled to Esther. Darling, how many ghosts from your past am I going to have to exorcise? It's not a problem. I just want to be prepared. Esther ignored him this time, putting on her headphones and opening the folder that Brock had given her. When they finally arrived in Seattle, Xavier headed for Jonathan's hotel, while Esther went to her pitch meetings. Emerging from the conference room between back-to-back pitches, Esther was intercepted by Brock. His voice sounded a note of urgency. Esther, I just convinced the Sloan Fund to come talk with us. I need you to handle the welcoming committee, but don't worry. I'll be all yours for the investor dinner tonight. The Sloan Fund? You mean... Yeah, Lover Boy's family. You can handle it, right? Esther nodded confidently, and Brock hurried off. Her emotions whirling, Esther slipped away to the bathroom, checking her appearance and giving herself a pep talk. They desperately needed this investment, but she refused to beg Xavier's family for scraps. All she could do was hope that he wouldn't be there. After adding one quick spray of perfume, she marched back into the conference room. Before the door even shut behind her, she saw that the room was deserted, save for a solitary figure looking out the vast floor-to-ceiling window. He was backlit by the bright afternoon sun, so it was hard to see any details, but she knew the silhouette immediately. A knot formed in her stomach as she realized she wouldn't be begging Xavier's family for money. She'd be begging Xavier himself. The soft sound of her entrance prompted him to turn around, and as he stepped away from the window, Esther locked eyes with him. She was the first to extend her hand, and she smiled with unwavering professionalism. Mr. Sloan, what a pleasure. I'm Sabrina, the CEO and head designer at Unique. Our majority shareholder was called out, so I'll be answering any questions you might have about our prospectus. Please, call me Xavier. He met her handshake, and his long fingers enveloped her small hands. He squeezed firmly, but not aggressively, and when he let go, Esther's heart jumped. They both settled into their seats, and Esther directed him to open to the table of contents. Esther was a master at her craft, adept at using narrative and charisma to reinforce her business savvy. With unwavering focus, she challenged every term that skewed in favor of the Sloan Fund, which sparked fiery debates across the table. But after an hour of spirited conversation, both parties stood and shook hands again. The contract was signed, and Unique had its first big investor. The celebratory dinner was hosted in a nearby restaurant, mere steps away from the Sloan Fund's office. When Esther, Xavier, and their entourage arrived, they found Brock already waiting in their private room. After greeting everyone, Esther saw Xavier step outside to get some air and summon the courage to follow him. She reasoned that if he couldn't respect her after the negotiation she led that afternoon, that he truly was a lost cause. But just as she was about to tap him on the shoulder, a familiar figure froze her in her tracks. He was a hulking man with a powerful physique. His shirt and pants accentuated his rippling muscles, and an ugly scar ran along the back of his hand. Just as he began to shift his gaze toward Esther, she snatched Xavier and spun him around. She snaked her arm around his neck and pulled him close until his body enveloped hers, shielding her from view. The scar man strolled past her, sparing only a brief, uninterested glance before heading back into the restaurant. Esther's eyes never left him, and only when he was out of sight did she finally exhale a sigh of relief. 2 years had passed, but she would never forget the man that Stark had sent to kill her. The man who had held a knife to her throat and laughed as she struggled against him. Shaking off her nerves, she softly disentangled herself from Xavier, and her voice came out a low, husky whisper. "Sorry about that." Xavier glanced at Esther's hands. One still clung to him with white knuckles, while the other was balled into a fist. "Do you plan on explaining what just happened? Or did you just mistake me for Austin?" She looked up at him, mortified. So much for gaining his respect. A few days after Nancy got back to New York, Jonathan called to tell her he was returning from Seattle as well. Kim's condition had stabilized, but she would be staying behind for continued treatment. Having not seen each other in over a week, Nancy and Jonathan agreed to a romantic dinner later that evening. October's chill had begun to sweep into the city, so Nancy paired a crisp, white knit shirt with light gray, wide-leg capri pants. She brought the look together with short boots and a hip windbreaker, making her outfit a symphony of style and youthfulness. She took the train from Brooklyn to the West Village, and she arrived before Jonathan, so she stood on a quiet corner near the restaurant to wait for him. She bobbed slightly to the rhythm of the song in her headphones until suddenly her attention was grabbed by the LED screen on top of a taxicab. It displayed one of her promotional images for Unique, and she found herself swept up in the surreal act of staring herself in the face. As she stood there, lost in her reverie, she felt the sudden, insidious pull at her bag. As she spun around, a hand muffled her screams and released a nauseating smell that sent her head spinning. Fear exploded within her as she battled to free herself, but her assailant was too strong and quickly dragged her into a van that was waiting in the shadows nearby. "We got her! Get this van moving! Now!" The venomous smell continued to invade her nostrils, a toxic cloud that swiftly stole her vitality. As her senses dimmed and her hearing blurred into a muffled, incomprehensible hum, she picked up the sinister murmuring of her captors. "First we get the video, then we get paid. I hope she's ready for her close-up." As Jonathan was leaving his final meeting of the day, his phone buzzed with a call from his driver. His mother had fallen ill, and he was hurrying home to assist her. Without a second thought, Jonathan dismissed him and took the driver's seat himself. Pulling up to the restaurant, Jonathan spotted a group of men gathered around a van across the street. He initially disregarded it, but just as the van doors shut, his gaze snagged on the figure they were dragging inside. It was Maria. His heart leapt into his throat, his pupils constricted into pinpoints. He jerked his car into the left lane, but the van quickly melded into traffic, its silhouette growing faint in his rear view. Jonathan found himself on the opposite side of the road, and he knew if he circled back, he would likely lose her trail entirely. A daring idea sparked in his mind, his gaze fixed on the landscape median that split the road. He floored the gas pedal and yanked the wheel, leaving a fresh skid mark in the road as he swung the car onto the median. Narrowly dodging trees and bushes, he accelerated through a flower bed and tightened his grip as he sped toward a metal barrier. A deafening crash echoed through the street as his car tore through it, and he left a jagged hole in its wake. Shocked drivers swerved to avoid Jonathan as he tore after the van. When he finally narrowed the gap between them to about 2 cars, Maria's captors suddenly seemed to realize he was following them. They hit the gas and swerved through the heavy traffic trying to lose him. The chase was on. In the back of the van, Nancy clung to consciousness while the men who abducted her began to panic. "Damn it! Who the hell is following us?" "Must be some wannabe superhero. He'll be sorry he messed with us." "What's the next move, boss? Should we just get the video now and toss the evidence when we're done?" "Just shut up and get on with it. Remember what she said. It has to look like she wants it." The men exchanged smirks and gathered around Nancy to do something unthinkable. But out of nowhere, the van swerved violently, The men were thrown off balance and collapsed in a disorganized heap, while Nancy was jerked against the van's wall, a sharp pain piercing through the fog of her consciousness. "The car's closing in! Hurry up back there!" Barely awake, Nancy's fingers brushed against a knife that had fallen to the floor. She quickly slid it up her sleeve, then remained motionless, waiting to strike. As the men got to their feet, one of them shouted, "Look out!" But he was cut off by the abrasive screech of tires against asphalt. Their van rammed into an abandoned car and abruptly came to a halt. One of the men grabbed Nancy and held a knife to her throat as the rest burst out of the van to confront their pursuer. Nancy feigned unconsciousness, but her eyes suddenly scanned the surroundings as she was dragged out of the van. They were near an isolated bridge pillar, surrounded by demolition zones on the far edge of Manhattan. Bathed in the weak glow of sparse lighting, the road was untouched by foot traffic. Nancy tightened her grip on the knife as the man yanked her around the front of the van, but her heart skipped a beat when she saw the car that had been chasing them. It wasn't the police. It was Jonathan. His car skidded to a stop, and out stepped a solitary figure, backlit by a lone street lamp. The cloak of darkness that blanketed the night further enhanced his mysterious allure, and his towering figure cast an elongated, ghostly shadow. Nancy's gaze was riveted to him as he slowly stepped forward, but her panic surged anew when she realized that no one else had emerged from his car. Where was his driver? Had he been hurt during the chase? She doubted that even at full health, Jonathan would be able to take on this entire gang alone. Suddenly, she was shoved forward, abruptly coming face to face with Jonathan. "Release her. Now." His voice was a cool, composed whisper, and his fearless aura permeated the charged environment. Despite standing solo against a crowd of adversaries, he projected an unwavering confidence. For some reason, she recalled the lesson he taught her at the gun range months earlier. If you win the psychological battle, the fight is over before it even starts. Caught off guard by Jonathan's poise, the men glanced at each other in confusion. The one holding Nancy tightened his grip. "Just who the hell do you think you are? If you know what's good for you, you'll get back in your little car and pretend you never saw anything." Jonathan didn't respond. He merely stared back at him with a penetrating, murderous glare. The man faltered and glanced at the goons assembled behind him. "What the hell's wrong with this guy?" One of them scoffed. "He's a goodie, 2 shoes and a fancy suit, and he thinks he can scare us. I say we make this quick, and then go collect our payment." Another man pulled out a knife and sneered. "I call his watch." At that precise moment, their boss staggered from the front seat of the van, clutching his chest where it slammed into the steering wheel. His eyes were riveted on Jonathan, and his face betrayed his fear. "God damn it! That's Jonathan Davis!" The sound of his name seemed to freeze the air. The men's blustering courage evaporated, but the boss quickly rallied them. "That only leaves us one option. We kill him right here, right now, before his backup gets here. Time to see if all the legends are true." The men grasped the chilling implications, and their eyes burned with wild determination. Jonathan smirked as he tossed off his blazer and rolled up his sleeves. "If you insist, it's your funeral either way." With that, the boss charged at Jonathan, and his men pulled out their weapons and followed him into the fight. A cold dread wrapped around Nancy's heart. Jonathan was a powerful fighter, but he was dangerously outmanned and outgunned. Desperate to help him, she began slowly inching the knife out of her sleeve. Amidst the chaos of the brawl, Jonathan was a whirlwind of ruthless precision, first singling out their boss, and swiftly neutralizing him with an elbow to the face that knocked him out cold. Despite his agility, he was being attacked from all angles, and his shirt was soon shredded and spattered with blood. Suddenly, the man gripping Nancy shouted, "One more move and all." Before he could finish his threat, Nancy plunged her knife into his gut. His grip on her involuntarily loosened, and in a daring twist, Nancy whipped around and buried her knife in his chest. She sprang away from his falling body and fled toward Jonathan with every ounce of strength she could muster. She couldn't afford to be captured, not if it would compromise Jonathan. As if tethered by some unseen bond, Jonathan launched his own assault at the same moment, flattening one man's face on the hood of his car before collapsing another's windpipe with a lightning-fast jab to the throat. Momentarily free, he sped toward Nancy and ensnared her in his protective embrace. His voice came out as an urgent whisper. "Have they drugged you?" Nancy wavered in his grasp, her voice tightening with anxiety as she saw a throng closing in around them. "I'm sorry. I feel so weak. You should go and get back up. I don't think they want to kill me." Jonathan cut her off and pressed her face into his chest. "I'm not going anywhere, Maria." With one arm cradling her and the other one yielding a length of pipe, Jonathan stood defiantly, ready to take on all comers. In a flash, Nancy was lost in a tempest of brutality. Her cheek remained pressed against the softness of Jonathan's shirt, and a discordant symphony of violence filled her ears. Shouting, groaning, the clang of weapons, and the fleshy thud of hits landed. She wrapped her arms tightly around Jonathan's waist, and he bore her entire weight, artfully ducking and dodging in a perilous dance. Her heart mirrored the tumult around her, its rhythm careening between hope and fear. Suddenly, a strike on Jonathan's back brought his movements to a brief halt. A warm, wet sensation rushed over Nancy's head, and her breath caught in her throat. Before she could react, one of the men shouted, "He's hurt. Let's get the woman and get out of here." Nancy let go of Jonathan's waist and looked at her hand. It was covered in his blood. She remembered the sudden pivot Jonathan had executed a moment before, and realized that he had shielded her from a knife attack and absorbed it himself. She pressed down on his wound, but no matter how hard she tried, his blood continued to well up and trickle through her fingers. She could tell his injuries were slowing him down, but he continued to deflect blow after blow. Each impact on his shoulders, legs, and back felt like a punch to Nancy's heart. But somehow, through it all, she remained completely untouched. A tide of emotions surged within her. Whatever barriers had remained in her mind seemed to instantaneously dissolve when she felt Jonathan's blood. It struck her that for the first time, there existed a man who would willingly risk his own life to ensure her safety, no matter the circumstances, who would fight any fight for her and never give up. Nancy cried out, burying her face deeper in Jonathan's chest. "I don't deserve this. Get out of here and save yourself." But his only response was to hold her even tighter. The brutal melee went on for what felt like an eternity, until Jonathan suddenly pulled Nancy away. Her world went from a whirl of dark fabric and the smell of blood to clear, sharp reality. She stumbled backwards, catching herself just in time to see him take two simultaneous blows. "Jonathan!" Her voice ripped through the tumult, raw and terrified. She surged forward, but he was a force of nature, slashing the throat of one adversary and fending off another with the pipe. He looked at her, his voice ragged with strain. "Run! Now!" Nancy's breath hitched as she took him in, a human canvas of blood and determination. His starched white shirt was stained, an unsettling deep crimson, and his towering figure swayed on the brink of collapse, kept upright by iron will alone. "Go!" he roared, and hurled himself back into the fray. With a final, desperate glance at Jonathan, Nancy ran for the bridge. Every step was a struggle, and she could feel the strength ebbing from her body. Reaching the bridge, she fumbled for her phone and dialed Jack. He answered, and Nancy instantly shouted over him, her voice trembling with fear. "We're under attack! Jonathan's hurt! It's bad, Jack!" She hung up and swiftly shared her location, her hands quacking violently. The drugs still surged through her veins and made the world spin, and her limbs feel like lead weights. In a desperate bid for clarity, she slapped herself on the face and sprinted onto the bridge, frantically flagging down passing cars. The road was scarcely traveled, so she stumbled to the center of the road and screamed for help. After 2 cars drove right past her, a family of 3 finally stopped. She stumbled up to the driver's window and dread clawed at her insides. "Please, beneath the bridge! They attacked us!" But before she can continue, her balance faltered. The growing weakness in her body gnawed at every cell, and the last thing she felt before the world went black was her legs crumbling beneath her. Consciousness came back slowly, like the dawn breaking after the darkest light. Nancy awoke to bright, unfamiliar sounds, and as she blinked open her eyes, her gaze swept over an unfamiliar hotel room. She sat up with a start, the reality of her environment starkly juxtaposing the restless fog of her sleep. As she struggled to remember where she was or how she got there, a doorbell shattered the silence. Shaking her head to clear her mind, she found her voice. "Who's there?" A gentle but detached female voice came back. "Miss Miller, I brought your morning meal." Nancy's mind was plunged into confusion. As she stumbled towards the door, fragments of the previous day taunted her mind, veiled and disjointed. She eased the door open and accepted the breakfast with a polite nod. "Sorry, but where am I?" The server cocked her head. "You're in the owner's suite at the Diamond Club." Nancy's eyebrows knitted together in consternation. "How did I get here? And where's Jonathan?" "Jack had you chauffeured here." The waiter cracked an indulgent smile. "You were, shall we say, quite inebriated. I helped you get your shoes and coat off and you got into bed." Nancy put a hand on her throbbing forehead. She remembered carefully choosing her outfit and how excited she was to welcome Jonathan back from Seattle. But the rest of the night unraveled into an enigma, obscured by what was apparently way too much alcohol. Nursing her headache with a coffee, Nancy caught a glimpse of her cheek in the mirror and saw some pink outline of a hand. As she examined the slap mark, images of her sprinting up the bridge, desperate and wild-eyed, flashed across her mind. Finally, they triggered a deluge of chilling memories. Fear seized her heart as the terrifying truth unfolded in her mind. She frantically dug out her phone and called Jonathan. The endless ringing cranked her anxiety further, so she hung up and called Jack next. He answered quickly, and his voice was a ragged whisper, burdened with exhaustion. "Maria, how are you feeling?" She blew past his question. "Where's Jonathan? What happened to him?" The dread of a terrible revelation weighed down her heart, but she clung to the desperate hope that it was all a horrible dream. Jack paused, and her hopes were dashed in an instant. "He's still in the OR. His situation, it's precarious." Her world tilted, and she struggled to maintain her balance. "Which hospital? I'm on my way." "Stay where you are, Maria. I'll send a driver." Minutes later, Nancy was running down the front steps of the Diamond Club. A driver awaited her with an open door and a somber expression, and the journey to the hospital was a disorienting blur. When the car finally stopped, Nancy sprung out and bulldozed her way into an elevator. As the doors opened, she found herself face to face with Jack and Norman, backed by an entourage of Norman's personnel. They had sealed off the entire floor in an effort to maintain confidentiality about Jonathan's situation. Nancy stammered, her voice barely audible amidst the hospital noise. "Is he still in surgery?" Jack nodded, his face mirroring her own fear. "His wounds were extensive, and he's lost a lot of blood. But have faith. He's a fighter." All Nancy could do was nod in agreement. Almost on cue, the forbidding doors of the operating room swung open. The doctor emerged, and Nancy felt her heart make a leap into her throat. Jack was the first to find his voice. "Doctor, how is he?" "The surgery was successful. He's out of danger, for now." Relief washed over Nancy like a wave, and she choked back a sob as the medical team wheeled Jonathan out. His handsome features had gone pale, and his brow was furrowed in anesthetized slumber. The instant her eyes fell on him, an avalanche of raw emotion plummeted her, sending unbidden tears tumbling down her cheeks. Without a word, she wiped her face dry and followed the procession to the intensive care unit. Once Jonathan was settled in the ICU, the doctors outlined his injuries, current condition, and recovery plan. Each word rang in Nancy's ears and burned itself into her memory. Whatever happened next, she was going to be by Jonathan's side for every moment of it. When the doctor finally stepped out, Jack turned to her, his gaze heavy with unspoken worry. "Maria, I've got a million loose ends to tie up. Can you stay with him?" Nancy nodded, a determined fire burning in her eyes. "I won't leave his side. I'll let you know when he wakes up." Jack and Norman left a few people behind to watch over the room, then departed. Alone in the echoing silence of the ward, Nancy found herself face to face with her unconscious beloved. She moved to the side of his bed, and her eyes stayed glued to his pale face, as if trying to absorb every detail. The coarse hospital blanket was a poor substitute for his usual warmth, and as she peeled back a corner, she discovered his bare, wounded torso cocooned in white gauze. Though his bleeding had been staunched, the sight still made her heart wrench. One particularly large patch on his abdomen sent a shudder through her, her vision blurring with fresh tears. She cautiously covered him up, and her fingers instinctively found and clasped his uninjured hand. The warmth was comforting, but a hollow void echoed back at her. He didn't grasp her hand in return. A ragged sob escaped her lips, and she bowed over him, pressing her tear-streaked face into his shoulder. The room returned to its eerie silence, and the rhythm of their shallow breaths formed a haunting duet. As Jonathan neared the end of his IV bag, Nancy pulled back to reality. She reluctantly relinquished Jonathan's hand and was about to call a nurse, but as she looked back, the morning sunlight peeled through the window and painted an ethereal portrait of Jonathan sleeping. His pale, rugged face, gilded with the warm glow, looked like some kind of divine sculpture. A magnetic force tugged at her heartstrings and drew her closer to him. She lowered her face over his, and their lips hovered tantalizingly close to each other. When they finally met in a gentle kiss, Nancy's brain lit up like a switchboard. The electric thrill of the contact hummed on her lips, and a burst of gratitude erupted within her. Her lips lingered over his for a moment longer, before she finally pulled back, her heart hammering against her ribcage. It was then that she noticed a subtle quiver in his eyelashes. He was waking up. His eyes fluttered open, and when their gazes met, Nancy found herself unable to move or speak. When her voice finally emerged, it was a tiny whisper. "You're awake." In contrast, Jonathan's voice was raspy and strained. "Maria, are you okay?" The concern in his voice sent a fresh wave of tears into her eyes. "I'm fine. But what you did. God, I was so scared." Nancy didn't want to get hysterical, so she took a deep breath and stood. "Give me a moment to get the doctor for the IV." Nancy managed to calm herself down while the doctor checked on Jonathan, and she soon returned to his side, her fingers delicately intertwining with his. "Are you hurting anywhere? Is anything uncomfortable? Are you thirsty?" Jonathan attempted to shift, but a wave of pain made him wince. "Just water, thank you." Nancy quickly poured him a cup and guided a straw to his lips. "Take it slow, don't choke." He drained the cup under her watchful gaze, and she whisked it away when he finished. "Are you hungry? Should I get you?" But her words trailed off as Jonathan's eyes fell to her footwear. His mouth twitched with a suppressed laugh. Nancy blushed when she realized she was still wearing fluffy hotel slippers. "I rushed over as soon as I heard. I completely forgot about my shoes." He smiled at her confession. "Come over here." She moved towards him, her hand engulfed by his as he held her gaze. "You were frightened. For me?" Her pulse pounded loudly in her ears, and she bit her lower lip. "Of course I was. But I was frightened for me too." 1,000 words tumbled in her mind, but none found their way to her lips. The room was silent until Nancy broke it with a whisper. The idea of living without you was just too awful to bear. His hand tenderly brushed her hair. It won't happen again, I promise. But I blame myself. You always encouraged me to train, to be ready for situations like this. But I was complacent. I'm going to work harder from now on. The next time someone comes after me, I'll be ready. Then it won't fall to you. Jonathan watched her, then smiled mischievously. Speaking of getting complacent, I don't think you finished what you started earlier. What? When I woke up, it seemed like you were in the middle of something. Her eyes widened and a flush crept up her face. You felt that? His smirk deepened. What can I say? Your kiss pulled me back from the darkness. He beckoned her closer with a suggestive tilt of his head. Her heart pounded a wild rhythm as she faced his inviting gaze, and she closed the distance between them. But just as their lips were about to meet, the door creaked open. The interruption sent a shockwave through Nancy, who shot up in her seat. Norman appeared in the doorway and cleared his throat. Sir, Maria, we figured out which group supplied the men behind yesterday's attack, and who paid them to do it. Nancy's gaze snapped onto Norman, and Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Who was it? And what do you need to do in order to wipe them off the face of the earth? It was Amelia, Stark's girlfriend. She hired them to abduct Maria and make a video that would destroy her reputation. Norman's tone was icy and efficient. We already finished off the rest of the gang, and I've located Amelia. As for your second question, all I need is for you to say the word. Jonathan's gaze turned into a smoldering glare as he considered Amelia's fate. This is more complicated than I imagined. We've already prodded Stark once this week, but we can't allow her to get away with this either. Nancy suddenly spoke up, a hardened edge creeping into her voice. Leave her to me. Jonathan looked at her skeptically. Maria, mercy won't do us any good here. Which is exactly why I won't show any. Jonathan nodded and turned to Norman. Very well. Keep her under strict surveillance, and don't let her slip through the cracks. We'll wait for Maria's plan. Norman let himself out, and Nancy started to speak, but Jonathan cut her off. Come back here. Let's pick up where we left off. Nancy laughed and feigned a protest. But you're injured, Jonathan. With a cocky grin, he pointed at his lips. Not all of me. Nancy rolled her eyes and crossed the room to him. Their lips were united, and the kiss was like a lightning strike, sparking a wildfire of passion that consumed them both. Jonathan's fervor belied his wounded state, and Nancy's fingers traced a path along his neck. When they finally came up for air, a sigh slipped from Jonathan's lips. Maria, do you know how badly I yearn for your body? Nancy chided him. Jonathan, you're in no condition to be thinking about things like that. Her eyes flitted downward and landed on the conspicuous bulge beneath his thin blanket. Apparently my body would beg to differ. Pausing, he arched an eyebrow at her. So are you saying the only thing stopping us is me being laid up? Nancy cracked a coy smile. Why don't you get better and find out for yourself? You're torturing me. Do you know that? Then quit thinking about it. How can I stop when you're right here? That sounds like a you problem. Emboldened by Jonathan's lack of mobility, Nancy knocked his empty water cup on the floor. Oops. Slowly and seductively, she bent over to pick it up. She replaced it on his side table, then brazenly licked her finger. Sorry, I got a little wet. Jonathan groaned in frustration. I'm going to get you back for this, and when I get revenge, I get it 10 times over. Don't threaten me with a good time. Jonathan tried to laugh, but was immediately writhing in pain. Rushing back to his side, Nancy grabbed his hand and pet his head. It was a cruel reminder that despite their banter, memories of the previous day still cast a long shadow over the present. Jonathan had been her shield among a storm of danger. No matter how many blows he took, he withstood the onslaught and got them out safely. He had always been handsome, But now she saw him like a kind of celestial warrior. Finding solace in the crook of his arm, Nancy's voice caressed the air. "I'll never be able to thank you enough, Jonathan. Not just for last night. I thought I would never feel hope again. And now I see beauty and possibility everywhere. And it's all because of you." With that, they fell asleep in each other's arms. Meanwhile, in the heart of the city, Amelia was on the third day of a shopping marathon when a creepy sensation began to prick at her mind. A gnawing paranoia that she was being watched. After hours without being able to spot anyone tailing her, she chalked it up to an overactive imagination. The men she hired had relayed news of Nancy's capture the previous night, but the radio silence since then had stirred a vortex of suspicion in Amelia's mind. Her only consolation was that she'd only paid them half up front, so if they were still alive, they would come hunting for the remainder eventually. Her nerves began to settle as she imagined all the damage she could do with the video she'd commissioned. A sex tape could not only cost Maria her jobs as a spokesperson, it would drive Stark right back into Amelia's arms. And when she told him that it was her that had set it all up, he would remember why he fell in love with her in the first place, because she was just as much of a ruthless warrior as he was. As Amelia made the rounds at the high-end boutiques in Soho, she suddenly spotted a man watching her. But far from seeming like hired surveillance, he seemed to be coming on to her. Amelia was used to this and blew him off. But as she waited in line for the fitting rooms, he stepped up behind her, and his scent made her swoon. She turned around and saw that he was far more handsome than she'd realized from across the store. His rugged jawline was covered in a short beard, and his piercing blue eyes stared down at her from behind thick, black Ray-Bans. His unbuttoned shirt gave her a glimpse of his powerful chest. He gave her a flirty wink, and a wicked grin curled up on her lips. Moments later, Amelia shoved the man up against the wall of her dressing room. Wasting no time, she pulled her underwear down and undid his belt. 15 minutes later, she emerged from the dressing room, tugging the edge of her dress down and fixing her hair. He wasn't what she expected to be trying on when she walked in, but she had to admit he fit nicely. Especially because Stark was never going to find out about it. When Amelia finally finished her shopping, the sun had long since set and star-studded the night sky. She was seething about the absence of the much-anticipated video, and she sneered internally at the men's ineptitude. If they had been caught or killed, then it was high time for Amelia to retreat to Houston and recalibrate her strategy. Back at the hospital, a video had just arrived in Nancy's inbox. One glimpse was enough to spark disgust, and she promptly shut it off. Jonathan clocked her expression and raised an eyebrow. "Is everything in place?" Nancy responded with a determined nod. "All set. The moment Amelia slithers back into Stark's arms, they'll both be receiving a special surprise." Jonathan grinned devilishly. "I have to say, I didn't know you had this side to you. Do you think it's the wrong call?" "Of course not. Your wish is my command, darling." Beneath her resolve, Nancy couldn't suppress a simmering dissatisfaction. Not only had Amelia tortured and murdered her in cold blood, she had nearly gotten Jonathan killed as well. But death was too lenient a punishment for a woman like Amelia. Like Jonathan said, if Nancy was going to get revenge, she was going to get it 10 times over. The nurse brought in Jonathan's dinner a few minutes later, and Nancy carefully prepared a spoonful of soup, cooling it with her breath before gently guiding it to his lips. As she did, his eyes remained fixed on her, radiating affection. As Maria fed him soup, Jonathan's mind flashed to the custom ring he'd commissioned the day he got back from Seattle. A profound vision had crystallized in his heart, one that was beautifully mundane. 60 more years shared with Maria. They'd be punctuated by laughter, shared work, intimate dinners, and the delightful chaos of raising children. An ordinary life made extraordinary by her presence. As she prepared another bite for him, a single word escaped his lips, filled with an ocean of sentiment. "Maria." She glanced up at him. "Nothing. Sorry. I just felt like saying your name." That night, Nancy remained beside him in the hospital suite. Their beds were set close in the intimate silence and formed an island of tranquility amid an ocean of pain. Jonathan's hand found hers in the silent darkness, and their fingers intertwined like so many silent promises. The next day, Nancy left early for another unique promo shoot. As noon approached, she wrapped up and headed back to the hospital to help Jonathan with his lunch. Taking in Nancy's worried frenzy, Esther teased her with an affectionate sigh. "Oh, how our dear Nancy's heart has been ensnared. It's as if I never existed." Nancy shot her a playful glare. "Behave. Once he's on his feet, I promise to shower you with attention again." "That's the spirit. Now, as your official counselor, it's my duty to accompany you to the hospital. I won't take no for an answer." Nancy nodded with gratitude, her heart lightened by Esther's camaraderie. When Nancy got to the hospital, she was surprised to see Xavier and Jonathan still working. Xavier had gotten there before Nancy had left that morning, and she was worried that Jonathan wasn't getting enough rest. Esther met Xavier's eyes and offered a cordial nod, while Nancy plucked the documents from Jonathan's grasp. "It's time to eat," Jonathan pleaded. "We were almost done, and I'm so behind after Seattle." "It's barely been 24 hours since your surgery. You need to rest. You can pick it back up later." She tidied the clutter of reports from the bedside table and replaced them with a plate of food. She spooned a mouthful and brought it to his lips, beaming with every bite he took. In the corner of the room, Xavier's eyes went wide, and he shared a quick glance with Jack. Grinning like a cat, Jack teased him. "Take it in, Xavier. That's what true love looks like." Nancy shot him a playful glare, and Jack continued. "Speaking of which, we've never met any of your girlfriends, Xavier. What's the holdup?" Esther perked up at the comment, and her gaze turned toward Xavier. He briefly made eye contact with her, and then smoothly deflected. "Work's just been hectic." Nancy couldn't help but wonder. Was he too busy to bring his girlfriends around, or too tied up to entertain a relationship at all? As Nancy fed Jonathan the last bite of his meal, she delicately wiped his mouth. Esther caught the intimate moment, and laughter bubbled up. "Oh, enough is enough." She pointed at Jack. "You, what's your name?" "Jack. You want to get lunch? I can't watch any more of their lovey-dovey antics." "You read my mind." Xavier followed them out, and Nancy shouted after them playfully. "So much for being my official counselor." When everyone had finally left for the day, only Nancy remained behind. In order to balance her demanding work schedule and Jonathan's recovery, she developed a rhythm. When his eyes closed, her laptop opened. A few hours later, the doctor arrived to change Jonathan's dressing and show Nancy the process. He lifted the sheet and exposed Jonathan's bare torso, causing Nancy's cheeks to flush. Desperate to get out of the impromptu threesome, she cut him off. "No need for a demonstration. I think I can handle it." The doctor looked at her skeptically, but Jonathan reassured him. "We'll be fine, Doc. Thank you. Just make sure you clean everything. We have to be very careful with bacteria during this part of the healing process." The doctor stepped out, and Nancy began prepping Jonathan. She wet a towel to give him a sponge bath, but when she removed his blanket, she was blindsided by a wave of anxiety. His chest was a patchwork of purples and blues, a stark contrast to the savage knife wounds on his abdomen and his back. As tenderly as possible, she traced a path down his torso, but the closer she got to his waist, the more she felt her resolve falter. "So, do you want me to clean your legs too?" Jonathan smiled innocently. "You heard the doctor. You have to clean everything. And make sure to go slow. You wouldn't want to get an infection, would you?" Nancy's breath hitched as she stared at the waistband of his underwear, her heart pounding in her chest. Nancy had always been aware of Jonathan's impressive form, but before now, her admiration was confined to stolen glances. Now, suddenly, it had transformed into something more intimate. His legs were long and powerful, with wheat-hued skin stretched taut over muscles that had been honed to perfection. But they also bore the marks of battle, a collage of bruises and abrasions. Nancy winced at the sight, her heart aching at his discomfort. "How did you even bear this?" Jonathan offered a brave and reassuring smile. "You were in danger. Nothing else mattered." His fortitude warmed her heart and stirred an irresistible urge to express her affection. She leaned forward, pressing a kiss on one of his bruises. At the touch of her lips, Jonathan's body went rigid and his muscles twitched. He growled at her with a low, warning rumble. "Maria, you're tempting fate." With only a sly grin, Nancy rinsed the towel and continued cleaning Jonathan from head to toe. He fell silent as she tenderly addressed the only parts of him she'd never seen before. And when she finally finished, Jonathan took a deep breath and smiled. "I saved your life, and for all we know, now you saved mine." She pinched his cheek. "Next time, just say thank you." Over the following week, Jonathan's excellent health and top-notch medical care helped him speed through his recovery. He had his stitches removed after 7 days and was promptly discharged from the hospital. He wasn't back to full strength yet, but he insisted on returning to work to reassure the Davis Group's employees and shareholders. On his way in, he stopped to speak to the press before ascending to the top floor via his private elevator. There, he endured a taxing 2-hour briefing on everything he'd missed before fatigue finally started creeping in. He found himself barely able to keep his eyes open as he journeyed back to his apartment that evening, but he was shaken out of his near sleep when his phone suddenly rang. He picked it up with a grunt, but the words from the other end sent an unexpected charge through him. "Sir, your customary is complete, and if I can say so, I believe it's my finest work. I've sent pictures to your email, and once you get back to me with any adjustments, I'll have it hand-delivered to your office by courier." Jonathan's eyes ignited as he opened the email, poring over the intricate designs. He was aware of Nancy's intention to bare her soul on his birthday, and he craved to match her with an equally poignant declaration. As soon as Jonathan was discharged from the hospital, Nancy threw herself into her backlog of work at the research lab. In whatever free time she could find, she continued working on the robot that Jonathan had requested for his birthday. One afternoon, as Nancy worked on Jonathan's robot during her lunch break, it caught Emma's attention. Her eyes went wide, and she looked from the robot to Nancy. "I've seen every robot you've ever made, and this looks 10 times as complicated. Is that a whole new design?" Nancy nodded with pride. "I wanted it to be special." Suddenly, she found herself surrounded by the rest of her coworkers. Mark chimed in first. "Hold on, is this for Jonathan?" Amanda's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, you put this much work into a gift?" Nancy blushed. "It's not that big of a deal. My PhD thesis was less intense than this." Amid the chorus of teasing, Eduardo chimed in with a rare grin. "Looks like our Maria's love-struck. Such a shame. I used to think she'd grow up to be like me." Professor Benedict countered with a gentle smile. "She's always been a tender soul. Maybe she just didn't want you all to know because she knew you'd react like animals." Amid the volley of good-natured banter, Nancy picked up her laser engraving machine and prepared to put on the final touches. On the robot's chest badge, Nancy diligently engraved Jonathan's name in a powerful block script. On the bottom of its foot, she carved out 3 lines that were the very essence of her sentiments. "A protector for my protector. Happy birthday, Jonathan. I love you." With the engravings complete, she nestled the robot in its handmade box and wrapped it in a bow. On the night before Jonathan's birthday, Nancy and Jonathan shared a quiet dinner on his apartment's balcony. Nancy was stunned at his near-total recovery in such a short time, but more than anything, she was glad to have him back. As they ate, time seemed to hang in the balance, its relentless march paused by their intimate silence. After they ate, Jonathan rose from his seat and walked over to Nancy. wrapping his arms around her waist and leaning down for a kiss. Soft music drifted into their ears, and Nancy eagerly surrendered to his touch, their movements blending into a mesmerizing dance from the serene balcony into the warmth of his penthouse. As they retreated, their movements were punctuated by the intoxicating rhythm of their shared kisses. They found themselves drawn to the plush sofa in the main room, where the world suddenly tilted, and Nancy collapsed into the sofa's embrace. Nancy's smile glimmered softly in the dim light. "I fear I may be stuck here." Jonathan pressed closer, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Then I've got you right where I want you." His lips found hers again, and their kiss deepened. As his body enveloped her, he whispered in her ear with a deep, seductive rumble. "No need to be coy, Maria. I know you want it as badly as I do." Nancy's cheeks flushed, and she stammered to think of a playful retort. Noticing her blush, Jonathan laughed, and he narrowed his eyes. "Say it. Tell me what you want." No, nothing." Her denial was hardly convincing, leading to more of his playful taunting. He guided her hand toward his chest, a landscape of toned muscles beneath her fingertips. Each contact sparked a flame that danced up her arm and ignited her heart. Her pulse thundered in her ears as her trembling fingers traced the remnants of his wound. "Does it hurt?" Her voice was barely a whisper, her gaze riveted to his. "No, thanks to you, I'm fully healed." A rush of heat flooded Nancy's cheeks, her mind awash with conflicting emotions. But when her gaze met his, with his face that could put Adonis to shame, she realized she was feeling the intoxicating pull of desire. She remembered her arranged engagement with Stark. Despite their shared history, he was never more than a friend. Her feelings had remained dormant, devoid of any romantic inclination. This had once led her to doubt her own capacity for love. She finally knew what it felt like to fall head over heels. In the tender silence, Jonathan's lips traced a path along her skin, setting off waves of desire. As their shared heat rose, their clothes seemed to melt away, revealing bare skin to eager hands. His voice, hoarse with the desire, echoed in the quiet room. "Do you want me, Maria?" He held her gaze with raw intensity as Nancy lifted her hand and pressed it gently against his chest. She nodded gently, and her voice was soft, a breathless whisper just for him. "I'm yours, Jonathan. All of me." As he lifted her hands above her head, their fingers laced together in a tender bond. Suddenly, a wave of ecstasy rippled across her entire body and made her mind go blank. Her breathing quickened, and as a gentle moan escaped her mouth, Jonathan swallowed it in a powerful kiss. Her body wrapped around his like ivy on a mighty oak, and Nancy could think of nothing besides the extraordinary feeling welling up slowly from deep inside her. She felt a release that made her entire body go stiff and left her gasping for air. As her heart rate slowly returned to normal and her muscles untensed, she looked up at Jonathan and locked eyes with him. Before she knew what had happened, tears suddenly began spilling from her eyes in a relentless cascade. Jonathan held her close and murmured in her ear, "What's wrong? Did I hurt you?" Nancy shook her head. On the contrary, Jonathan's love and tenderness had seemingly unlocked a deluge of pent-up emotions within her and set free tears that she was powerless to stem. "You did nothing wrong, Jonathan. It's the opposite." He enveloped her in his embrace, and his hand gently swept up and down her back in soothing strokes. His voice was a soft melody. "Don't cry, Maria. Don't cry. I promise, from now on, there will be no more pain, no more fear, only love." Nancy laughed to herself at how impossible that had once seemed, a future free of pain. No sudden, catastrophic events that threatened to cripple her, steal years of her life, or confine her to the cold sterility of a hospital. No vile enemies with sulfuric acid, set to steal her beauty, to rob her of sight. No devastating inferno consuming everything she held dear, reducing loved ones to piles of ash. Overwhelmed by a wave of self-consciousness, Nancy opened her mouth to speak, only to be silenced by a searing kiss and then a commanding whisper. "You can tell me when you're ready. Just know, I see your pain, and I promise to shield you from anything else this life has to throw at us." In the aftermath of their passion, Jonathan scooped her up into his arms and carried her towards the bathroom. He lowered her gently into the warm bath and climbed in after her. The spacious tub allowed their bodies to brush against each other, igniting another rush of shared passion. Nancy's hand explored his body beneath the water, and she found herself unable to suppress a chuckle. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice was filled with sarcasm. "Well, well, well, what do we have here?" With a roguish grin, Jonathan cut her off and pressed her against the side of the tub, capturing her lips in a fervent kiss. When he finally pulled away, his voice echoed in the steam-filled room. "You're the flame that fuels my desire. How am I supposed to resist?" With a sudden urgency, Jonathan and Nancy joined together once again. With steam rising all around them, they sent waves of water sloshing over the edge of the tub. Undaunted, they continued until they were utterly spent. When their passion finally subsided, Nancy found herself barely able to move. Jonathan tenderly cleaned her before carrying her back to the bed. And as they settled in next to each other, she noticed that the clock was minutes away from switching over to midnight. Weary yet determined, she fought the pull of sleep and listened to the steady rhythm of Jonathan's heartbeat as she awaited the stroke of midnight. When it finally came, Nancy stirred and lifted her gaze to meet Jonathan's. Her voice was barely a whisper, a sweet murmur meant only for him. "Happy birthday, my darling." Jonathan's gaze fell upon the wall clock just as it pierced the veil of midnight. His birthday had begun, and though the phrase "happy birthday" had slipped through countless lips over the years, when it emanated from Nancy, it played a powerful chord within him. This was the first celebration he'd shared with the woman who had swept him off his feet, and he found himself yearning for her presence at every future birthday. He leaned in, his lips aching to utter words of affection, only to find her already in the sweet thrall of slumber. He gazed at her sleeping face, and the gravity of his responsibility swept over him. Though they weren't married yet, he knew it was what he wanted, and that meant from that day forward, he could no longer make decisions based only on his needs. In his mind, they were now an inseparable pair. As he tenderly kissed the top of her head, sleep drew him under its enchanting spell. Golden rays of morning sun invaded the room, bathing in its celestial glow. Nancy's internal clock stirred her awake, but the cocoon of comfort she found herself in was too inviting to abandon. As she blinked her eyes open, she saw Jonathan's face. He had just woken up as well, and radiated a blend of laziness and latent mischief, his lips curled up in a coy smile. Before she could speak, she was ensnared in his grip, and the world spun into a dizzying blur. His sexual vigor so early in the morning stunned her. The previous night still felt fresh in her muscles, but he seemed undeterred by exhaustion. Lost in her thoughts, she succumbed to his electrifying passion, and their clothes were soon scattered to the floor. In the aftermath, she lay spent against Jonathan's chest, shooting him an accusatory glare. He merely chuckled, his voice a soothing rumble. "You'll adjust with a little more practice, and maybe a little cardio." "Geez, make a girl breakfast before you insult her fitness." He grinned. "You're right. Where are my manners?" He hopped out of bed, and she grabbed for him. "I was kidding. It's your birthday, for God's sake. I'll make breakfast." "Allow me. I already got everything I needed." With that, he winked and stepped out. The prospect of breakfast in bed was an unfamiliar one for Nancy, but the allure was irresistible. In the span of a single week, the world had rotated on its axis. Nancy had gone from secret girlfriend to vigilant caregiver, and was now being doted on like they were already married. Breakfast quickly morphed into lunch, and as the clock struck 12, a glint of expectation flickered in Nancy's eyes. "I've got another birthday surprise for you." Jonathan rose from the bed and accepted his gift, gently peeling away the wrapping paper to reveal a sturdy, handmade metal box. Inside rested an imposing, masterfully crafted robot. His eyes settled on the name etched into the robot's shoulder. Ares. Appropriate, no? Jonathan paused, gathering his words. Is that how you see me? As your personal god of war? Nancy's cheeks flared scarlet, but she held his gaze and nodded. After their experience a couple weeks earlier, she no longer had any doubts that he could and would protect her. Suddenly, the metallic Ares sprung to life, its power core illuminating as it greeted Jonathan in a firm, dignified manner. Its chest badge lit up, revealing one word etched with precision. Jonathan. As he leaned over to kiss Nancy, Jonathan noticed another detail, the engravings on Ares' foot. As he read, Nancy watched his face light up. She had never seen him look so touched, so openly vulnerable. She had hoped her gift and its accompanying message would provide him with the same sense of security that he had given to her. The confidence that she had stopped running away and stopped building walls to separate them. With tears gleaming in his eyes, Jonathan placed Ares aside and pulled Nancy into another passionate kiss. Her lips tingled from his fervor, and when he finally relented, he whispered in her ear, Maria, your gift is perfect. I love it. Her heart quivered. As she started to respond, she found herself drawn back into his embrace. She hadn't even managed to tell him about everything Ares could do. Location tracking, navigation, music, search, and even surveillance. Caught in Jonathan's whirlwind, Nancy could only surrender to his desires. When they eventually separated, Nancy laughed to herself. It occurred to her that if their relentless lovemaking persisted at the same pace, they might never be able to leave his penthouse again. Rather than the blowout that Steve had thrown for himself a few months earlier, Jonathan had opted for a more intimate gathering at his home. As the afternoon progressed, and Nancy mulled the imminent arrival of his friends, it suddenly occurred to her that she hadn't come clean with Jonathan about her true identity. Committed to her word, Nancy pulled Jonathan to the sofa and sat him down. I'm sure you remember the other thing I promised you on your birthday. Jonathan nodded solemnly, and a long silence stretched out between them. Finally, Nancy continued. The truth is that I'm not who you think I am. At least not on the outside. I've been hiding a dark truth since the day we met, and it's something you deserve to know. Jonathan took her hand and intertwined their fingers. Whatever it is, you can tell me. I'm ready. She inhaled deeply, as if drawing courage from the air itself. Her fingers tightened around his, and she locked eyes with him. I'm not Maria. Not the way you understand me to be. This is Maria's body, but my soul, it isn't hers. Jonathan's face twisted in bewilderment. What are you suggesting? That you had some kind of radical cosmetic surgery? Were you hurt? Were you on the run? If you had told me sooner, I could have helped you. Nancy shook her head vehemently. What I mean is that I'm a completely different person. I know that sounds fantastical, but somehow, my soul came to occupy Maria's body. Jonathan was clearly struggling to accept her claim, but instead of questioning her, he cradled her in his arms and flashed an amiable grin. I always knew you were an angel sent from heaven. I'm being serious. I'm sorry, Maria. It's just hard to take in. She met his gaze squarely, and a solemn expression etched onto her face. Then let me tell you a story about a girl from Houston, a world away from here, and 7 years older than Maria. She was blessed with an idyllic life, loving parents, an affectionate adopted brother, and a younger brother who adored her. Her family was a sanctuary, a haven of serenity. As she blossomed into adulthood, a fascination for artificial intelligence took root. She found like-minded companions, and together they birthed their collective brainchild, the first generation of autonomous vehicles, the Phoenix. Despite being a stranger to romance, her privileged status attracted a flock of suitors. Unexpectedly, Her own adopted brother stepped into the fray, expressing his desire to marry her. While she felt no romantic pull towards him, she reasoned that his familiarity would make for a comfortable marriage, and that would still allow her to pursue her dreams. Nancy paused, steadying her voice. Eventually, they got engaged, but before their new chapter could begin, she stumbled upon her fiancé's illicit affair. She expected remorse, maybe even a broken engagement, but instead, she was plunged into a living nightmare. They captured her and imprisoned her into a windowless basement of a yacht. The rest of the world believed she had met her tragic end, but that was yet to come. Nancy's voice was steely now, her determination shining through. Her fiancé, the beast that he was, brought his new lover aboard the boat. When she confronted them, his lover retaliated by throwing sulfuric acid on her face. In an instant, her vision in one eye was obliterated, and her face was horribly disfigured. One day, he installed a television aboard the boat so she could see what had become of her family. Her mother had thrown herself from a rooftop in despair. Her brother had succumbed to muteness from the overwhelming stress. And her father, who had once been Houston's leading surgeon, had succumbed to madness. Suddenly, Jonathan spoke for the first time. His voice was hoarse with emotion. "Maria, if it's too much, we can stop. You can tell me more when you're ready." Nancy pulled him in close and felt her heart beating a steady rhythm against his. "It's okay. I want you to know. I'm not afraid anymore." She took a deep breath and picked up where she left off. The woman endured 3 years of relentless torture in the belly of that yacht. As she finally began to consider the unthinkable, ending it all would just put an end to her suffering, her fiancé and his lover came back. This time, they severed the tendons in her hands and paraded her ill father before her. She and her dad were the last 2 people who could prevent him from taking control of everything her family had built, and he was going to make sure they would never have the chance. Finally, the day came when they doused the boat in gasoline. Her voice was a fierce whisper that echoed in the quiet room. The woman and her father were engulfed in an all-consuming blaze and died together aboard the boat. When she woke again, it was in New York City, in a foreign body, in a stranger's bed. Your bed, to be specific. Jonathan's breath came in shallow gasps. His mind was a swirling tempest, a chaotic mix of shock, disbelief, and a horrifying clarity of her revelation. It felt as if an abyss had opened in his chest, and a howling wind was ripping through his being. Cold seeped into his bones, and pain stabbed at his heart. Before he could find his voice, Maria continued. When she came back to life, the first news she encountered was about the monster that had killed her. He was preparing to debut the Phoenix as a grand tribute to his deceased fiancé. Her voice dripped with malice, pulling Jonathan's mind back to the Davis family gathering. He remembered Nancy's intense loathing that night. At the time, he was baffled. Now, he understood. Turning to face him, Maria's eyes were teary but resolute. "Jonathan, I'm not Maria Miller. I'm Nancy Johnson." A deafening silence hung in the air, and Jonathan drew her closer into his arms. His hands were shaking, and the sheer horror of her ordeal left his soul trembling. He wondered how anyone could possibly survive such a hellish nightmare. To top it all off, she was claiming to be Nancy, the Nancy he knew, the Nancy he had loved from afar. As all the coincidences swirled in his mind, a wave of guilt crashed over him. What if he'd met Nancy sooner? What if he'd been more direct? Could her nightmarish ordeal have been averted? Could she have remained with her family, her dreams intact? Despite the guilt, his heart was laced with a profound sense of gratitude. She was alive. She was by his side, and until the day his body lay cold in the ground, he would make sure nothing like that could ever happen to her again. Moreover, he would hunt down the people who hurt her and destroy their lives with a brutality and ruthlessness they could scarcely imagine. Jonathan's fingers threaded through the silken curtain of Nancy's hair, drawing her into the sanctuary of his arms. Time seemed to stretch out like a vast sea, swelling beneath the beats of their hearts. Eventually, he managed to wrestle down the tempest of his emotions. He released her and smoothed the wild tendrils of her hair from her tear-streaked face. His voice was a soothing serenade, laden with regret. "Darling, please forgive me. I arrived too late." Nancy froze, her gaze piercing through the veil of his sorrow. He cradled her face in his hands, and the confession rolled off his tongue as heavy as stones. "I saw you 5 years ago. If only I'd said something. If only I'd known." "No, this isn't your guilt to bear. Stark and Amelia are the villains here." Jonathan's fists clenched like coiled vipers, his white knuckles a testament of the surging fury beneath his calm exterior. His voice dripped with vengeance, cold and ruthless. "Sweetheart, I will not rest until they pay in blood and torment. I'll make them beg for death. They'll endure the pain they dare inflict upon you 1,000-fold. You have my word." "They can't die. Not yet. I want the world to see them for what they really are. And now that I've saved Esther and Jacob, I can finally figure out how to accomplish that." Nancy knew that Jonathan was capable of killing Stark, but he had woven a complex tapestry of deceit over 3 years, painting himself as a cherished benefactor in the nation's eyes. Should he simply vanish or be found mysteriously dead, his image would morph into a tragic, immortalized hero. Nancy couldn't stand for that. Jonathan stroked her back, his voice a reassuring rumble. "I understand. We'll amass irrefutable evidence and show the world the beast behind the mask. I promise, your family's honor will be restored." At the sound of his words, Nancy's dam of resilience finally broke. Sobs ripped from her throat, each one a chilling testament to her hidden anguish. She wound her arms around his neck and burrowed her face into his shoulder. He cradled her, a lone comforting beacon amidst her sea of despair. When her sobs finally subsided into choked hiccups, he tenderly cradled her face. "No more tears, because you're never going to face the world alone again." She nodded, and Jonathan smirked. "Plus, we've got company coming over in a couple hours, and I don't want them thinking I made you cry." Nancy scoffed at his joke and lifted her gaze to meet his. Her eyes were swollen and tinged with red, but were utterly resolute. "Now you understand why trust comes so hard for me. When you're betrayed by the person closest to you, it shakes your belief to the core. Until now, I was too terrified to tell you the truth, too scared to risk losing even more. But then you risked your life for mine, as if it wasn't even a choice. That was the moment I realized I could trust you again, that you were different from anyone I had ever met." With a gentle hand, Nancy traced the contours of Jonathan's face, and her voice rang with newfound strength. "Jonathan, fear has been my constant companion. But you gave me the courage to live like a normal person again, to have hope for a better life." Jonathan gently nudged his nose against Nancy's, then tilted his head to capture her lips in a tender kiss. It was soft and comforting, lulling her tense nerves and slowing her frantic heart. After a few minutes, Jonathan realized that Maria had fallen asleep in his arms. With tender caution, he laid her down on the couch and swathed her in a blanket. He stared at her peaceful face, and her words echoed in his mind. Each syllable hung heavy with silent suffering, and told a tale of unimaginable pain. Jonathan had felt the bitter sting of burns, and had known their agonizing ache, but being devoured by an inferno was an alien and unfathomable experience to him. No wonder she'd been so terrified by a small flame. Pressing a tender kiss to her hair, Jonathan rose and withdrew from the room, phone in hand. When Jack picked up, Jonathan's voice was steely. "I need you to deploy agents to Houston. I want every detail there is on Stark and Amelia, starting from 5 years ago, and leave nothing out. no matter how small. Jack sounded bewildered by the scale of Jonathan's request, but his response was swift and professional. Yes, sir. I'll get the team on it. Is there anything in particular I should be looking out for? Let's just say I have a reason to believe he has some skeletons in his closet. But keep it discreet. We can't afford to tip them off. And no need to prepare expense reports on this. Cost is no object. Understood. I'll update you as soon as we have something. At that very moment, Nancy was ensnared in a dream of the past. She was a child again, and it was her birthday. Her mother had gifted her a beautiful princess dress, and her father gave her a shiny toy car. After opening gifts, she headed to the piano room to practice. As her fingers danced over the keys, the sound of Jacob's cries cut in from another room. Nancy's mother went to comfort him, but Nancy's gaze was suddenly caught by the sight of a young man in a tuxedo standing outside the house. He seemed oddly familiar in her dream. He was older by a few years, but tall and distinguished, in his immaculate black tuxedo. His shirt was a crisp white, and his tie was the color of a blooming rose. As she struggled to place his familiar face, her dream was interrupted, and her eyes fluttered open. Groggy and disoriented, she attempted to differentiate between dream and reality as her gaze settled on Jonathan. She blinked in confusion, her voice a whisper of bewilderment. But how did you grow up so fast? Indeed, the enigmatic boy from her dream was sitting right in front of her. But how was that possible? She scrutinized Jonathan, her voice a whisper, as if revealing a secret. I had a dream of you, but as a child. Jonathan's eyebrows arched, his curiosity piqued. Oh, really? She grasped his arm, the urgency in her voice evident. Do you have any photographs of your childhood? I want to see something. If it will make you happy, of course. A few minutes later, he returned with an old photo album and handed it over. Nancy eagerly flicked through the pictures, a bubble of laughter escaping her lips. You were all cheeks and eyes as a kid. So cute. As she delved deeper into the album, the evolution from a round-faced boy to a handsome young man unfolded before her. She sifted through images of him in a pint-sized suit during kindergarten, then his elementary school years as a band kid, before a particular photo brought her to a halt. The boy was a mirror image of the one in her dream. Jonathan, this is exactly how you appeared in my dream, down to the tie color. Jonathan shook his head in surprise. You think we crossed paths when we were young? Nancy shook her head, her voice filled with confusion. I don't know. In my dream, it was my birthday. I was playing piano, and you were standing right outside the window. But why would you have ever been at my house in Houston? Suddenly, Jonathan's eyes lit up. Wait, I do remember attending a banquet in Houston when I was 10. My mom made me wear a tuxedo. That's it. I must have met you there. I remember it so clearly now. I had just put on my birthday shoes, and I lost balance on the brick patio. A boy in a tuxedo caught me, and my heart skipped a beat. It was the first time I'd ever felt that way. So we go even further back than we knew? Nancy gave a nod, sighing at the whimsical ways of destiny. I guess so. Suddenly, his gaze turned flirtatious. You know, it occurs to me you never thanked me properly for catching you so many years ago. Jonathan, we were kids. Well, we aren't anymore. Jonathan threw Nancy onto the bed, and her laughter echoed in the room. What's gotten into you? Jonathan smirked. What do you think our younger selves would think if they saw us now? Nancy, unable to decide between laughter and exasperation, spotted an opportunity for mischief. Rising, she nibbled his ear and then whispered, They'd be thinking you're too old for me. Jonathan looked momentarily stunned before he suddenly ensnared Nancy, his lips crashing onto hers in a fervent kiss that rattled her senses. When he finally released her, his lips trailed away, but his hands remained defiantly locked around her waist. His voice was soft, yet loaded. "Nancy, do you recall when I confessed my feelings for you? You asked me who I would save first, if both you and Maria fell into the water." Nancy's heartbeat hammered in her chest, a twinge of regret stirring within her. She'd been playing games back then, seeking to throw him off. "You challenged my affection, but when I confessed my feelings for Nancy, you pretended to drown in a sea of jealousy." His fingertip traced the tip of her nose, and a playful glint sparked in his eyes. "Admit it. You orchestrated this whole thing." Nancy's lips tightened into a line, her cheeks flaming. It was seldom that she managed to ruffle his feathers, and now he had somewhat turned the tables. Jonathan's mouth curved into a wicked grin as his hand ventured under the hem of her underwear. "You won't know where, and you won't know when, but I'll get you back for that." Caught off guard, Nancy pulled back, but Jonathan pursued her until he had her trapped against the wall. After a heated exchange of kisses, her hair had transformed into a wild tangle, and all her clothes were in disarray. He suddenly released her and gathered his strewn clothes, smirking. "Better get dressed. It's almost 7. As he reached the door to his bedroom, he paused and turned back. "If it's okay with you, I'll keep calling you Maria. Not because I hold any preference for who you were then or who you are now, but because I want your future to be free from everything that haunted your past life. A fresh start." As Jonathan's retreating figure vanished from sight, Nancy's heart throbbed with an affection so profound it made her lightheaded. His last words clung to her like a sweet promise, a foretelling of a love-filled future. When Nancy finally glimpsed herself in a mirror, she cursed Jonathan under her breath. Her hair was a chaotic mess, and she couldn't find half her clothes. After a quick shower, she managed to get dressed just in time to help Jonathan welcome his guests. Latham strode in first, snatching up a drink and clearly feeling at home. "Jonathan, happy birthday!" He offered Jonathan a neatly wrapped gift, and Jonathan accepted it with a hint of intrigue. When he opened it, Nancy saw a box filled with garments and a distinct logo stamped on the front. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "You're giving me clothes." Latham offered a secretive chuckle. "Not just any clothes. Unwrap it with Maria tonight." Hannah arrived just in time to catch a glimpse of the mysterious gift, and her expression morphed into shock at the sight of the logo. "Latham, you seriously got Jonathan that?" Well, well, Hannah, you seem to be well acquainted with the brand. My old roommate's boyfriend got her some on her birthday." Hannah turned to Jonathan and punched her palm. "Jonathan, you mind knocking some manners into him?" Jonathan just smiled, accepting Hannah's gift. "Anyone heard from Xavier? It's not like him to be late." Latham chimed in. "I called him on my way here, and he said he's on his way, but he's basically been off-grid for 2 weeks, which means he's either planning to kill us or he's got a girlfriend." "So he's planning to kill us," Hannah said with a laugh. Just then, they heard 2 pairs of footsteps coming down the marble hall. One was the soft clap of men's Oxfords, and the other was a distinct click of high heels. They all shot stunned glances at each other, but a knowing smile crept on Nancy's face. She knew the only other person who was running late. Esther.